guys, and welcome to this week's review. And we are capping off Halloween with a joint surprise review. We are talking about the Richard Stanley adaptation, the two things you can't not make me happier about putting together, cosmic horror and eldritch terrors, and one Sir Nicolas Cage. We're talking about The Color Out of Space from 2021?
2019, actually.
2019. Okay.
It's been that long, yeah.
Wow. All right. So we're talking about Color of Space. So Nick, welcome to our official YouTube videos. This is Nick, everybody. He's the other half. Some would say the better half. And to them, I would say, shut up, that's mean. Of the Movie-Club Emporium. And we are live right now talking about all things Lovecraft, kind of wrapping up our Halloween. But we want to talk about The Color of Space. So Nick, if you want, do you want to kind of do a quick summary of Color of Space, or how do you want to proceed, sir? The floor is yours.
So, The Color Out of Space is based off the Lovecraft story of the same name. The basic premise is, on this rural farm lives a family, and one night a meteor strikes their farm. A meteor which contains colors that the likes of which these people have never seen. Indescribable colors, and indescribable is something you'll hear a lot about in this episode and Lovecraft in general. And this meteor disappears, and things on the farm start changing in very strange ways and being corrupted in various ways. And you get a view of what this family endures, and that's what happens in the short story. And the movie pretty much follows that same basic premise. It throws a little more into it, as with a lot of Lovecraft adaptations. There's usually a little more to them because most of the Lovecraft stuff was shorter, and some of those details that would work better in a movie aren't necessarily always there in the short stories. So they gotta add a little bit of things in to make it work for the movie, for better or worse. But the movie follows, it's kind of narrated by this hydrologist, which I'm assuming that's a real thing. A guy who's there to test the water, and he's kind of the one that bears witness to this whole event that occurs. He's our narrator, and you see the horrifying things that befall this family as things slowly change and get corrupted in increasingly terrifying ways, in ways that are hard to describe, indescribable, Lovecraft might say. So that's the skinny of what's going on in this movie. Meteor hits this farm, crazy lights, and many horrifying antics ensue.
So, right off the bat, I love this movie. It's a really great, faithful adaptation. The things that he changes, for the most part, I do really appreciate. I love the fact that he makes the narrator an actual character. The hydrologist is he plays a part in the story as opposed to just being kind of. Oh, the narrator is actually somebody who's been told by the hydrologist. I like that he's kind of on the ground floor. I'm still not quite sure what's going on with Tommy Chong and the alpacas. But number one, it's how great it was, because we had always been fans of Richard Stanley's Hardware because we rented it, and that movie is so wild. And then when we were at Texas Frightmare, they screened that documentary about him just kind of having his dream project just utterly collapse in pieces in his hands, and trying to drive him crazy. So it was nice to have him come back with this big Lovecraft adaptation. I love Nick Cage in this movie. You get all the Cageisms you want. I do find it weird, because there's a bit where, as things are progressing, his character starts channeling his dead father, who was really kind of always on his case. He was going to be a nothing. But when he starts channeling that, almost becomes him, almost a possession like thing. But he starts doing this voice that's kind of a mix of Donald Trump and Quentin Tarantino as his dad voice, and I love it. It's so goofy, but I love it. But really, to me, the heart of this movie, and honestly, the sadness of this movie lies in Jolie Richardson. Because speaking of Lovecraft things, which we'll talk about the big movie she's connected to with that later, I'm sure. But her character as this poor woman, dealing post cancer diagnosis. Your husband's Nick Cage. He's moved you to an alpaca farm, and then like everything just falls apart. I did see something that I want to get your take on. Then I'll let you go on with kind of your thoughts. I kind of took over there, but the color, the color out of space. The movie does a great job of making this kind of purpley pink really hard to look at. It almost kind of hurts your eyes. But I can't remember who I saw talking about it. And the kind of like with there's the black and white version of The Mist. Because in that Lovecraft story, he talks about there's a color. The whole story centers around this color that he can't describe because it doesn't exist in the human spectrum. So they had the idea of possibly doing the same movie, but doing it as black and white so that you couldn't see the color. And with that, I'd like to get your initial thoughts and what you think about. We'll start with that, but then your thoughts on the movie in general.
I think it's an interesting idea. I kind of have my doubts that would have worked out like they think it would have. The story's been adapted before, and we'll talk about that later on. But I I think the way they went about it with this color spectrum was probably the right way to do it. It's a fascinating idea, doing it in black and white and having it where you can't see it, and so you have to let your mind fill in the blanks there in your imagination. And that would be more true to Lovecraft probably in some ways, but I think the shimmering way they did it was probably about the best way to go about it. And I had read in regards to this movie that part of the deal with the color and why they chose this particular color was it's one that doesn't occur in nature, which makes it a little more off-putting. So it's something that seemingly comes from a natural cause, but nothing of this earth. I think the color they chose and the way they chose to display it was probably about the best way they could have done it. That being said, I've been wrong many times before about things they would try in movies. It may have worked out great, but I think they made the right call here, to be honest.
Oh, I do too. It would have just been an interesting take. It would, it would make more sense in the black and white version of Fury Road, uh, for what it's worth to me. But yeah, so what are your overall thoughts on the movie?
I think this movie gets a lot of things right. It is faithful in a lot of ways. Where for Lovecraft movies in general, I'm looking forward to capture a lot of the themes and basic ideas that evoke that same sense of mystery and fear and being an insignificant part of something much bigger than you and extremely hard to comprehend. And this movie really shows the incomprehensible well and shows this family in the middle of something that is so far beyond our understanding while they're trying to make sense of it and carry on life like normal, which is, I think, our pretty natural human response is we want to keep the status quo. We want to keep things moving along, keep about our day, even when it's getting increasingly hard to do that. And I got the feeling from this family, that's what they were trying to do. This family had gone through a lot of trauma. Mom's cancer diagnosis was, something that really tore into this family, and they did get a really good job of showing that how hard or having to combat cancer is been on the entire family. And, the kids are sort of restless because they live in the middle of nowhere. And the family itself, for the most part, I think felt re- pretty real. Um, and they're random bystanders in this terrifying event, and in which I love the part where the meteor hits, and it's just the young boy, the youngest son of the family, because there's three kids. You have the oldest son, the middle daughter, and the younger son. It's just he's like traumatized from this event, and they this meteor hits and this giant flash of light, and even Nicolas Cage's character saying later that it's like he can't really describe it. He's like, it's like nothing I've ever seen. Well, then the meteor disappears, and it's like, okay, well, I guess things will go back to normal. Well, they never go back to normal. Uh, I think, as mentioned before, they did a good job displaying the color and the way it's described with the meteor sinking into the ground, and just the and the fact that things in the farm become more and more corrupt. And at first it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it gets worse, and it keeps getting worse, and it gets so bad. The effect it has on the plants, and especially the animals, is terrifying. Uh, Culminating in the most utterly upsetting part of the movie. Are we going for spoilers for this?
We maybe do light spoilers, not crazy. I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about, and definitely want to save that for people who haven't seen the movie, because
Yes.
boy.
There's a part of this movie, and I say utterly upsetting, and I mean that in a good way, of something that I found truly disturbing. Not like disturbing in a cheap way, like some torture porn stuff, but really unsettling. And it's something that really stuck with me ever since I've seen it, and I think was executed very well. It's just the things this family goes through. Uh, yeah, try not to give away too much there. Uh, if anything, it's worth seeing for that part, to see something that can truly evoke that kind of visceral reaction from me, like few movies have. I also really like the character of the hydrologist, the narrator. I feel he has such a realistic response to this whole situation as he's seeing it unfolding, and he can recognize there are things that are very wrong, but the people at this farm aren't seem they aren't giving things the proper respect it deserves in terms of how they're dealing with it and how they're reacting to it. Uh, he's probably my favorite addition to the original story, because I agree, the original story had this more omniscient narrator, and he's there in it, reacting in real time to everything that's going down. And uh, I don't know the name of the guy who played him, but that guy can really act, and especially towards the end, he's taken to his core by the things he's seeing. Uh, I think the digital effects are pretty good. They're all right. They Not all of them hit home.
Are
There's
you
one of
talking
the
about the
animals.
cat?
I don't
The
cat. I
cat.
don't think the cat looks great. I think the practical effects are excellent.
Yeah.
And I liked seeing that they didn't just go all CGI. The practical effects with some of the animals and some of the things that befall the characters are just, I mean, truly impressive. And in 2023 or 2019, this movie came out. I'm really glad to see that that's not a lost art, and people are still pursuing practical effects, because the as good as CGI has gotten, well, unless it's The Flash, because that movie has awful CGI. Anyway, as great as CGI has gotten, there's just something that practical effects capture that CGI just can't. In this movie, the practical effects nail it. Um, that being said, uh, I did have some issues with it. I think they may have shoved a little too much extra stuff in it, like the whole daughter being Wiccan thing, or New Agey. I really felt that was kind of tacked on, and I didn't find it offensive anyway. It just felt like it really wasn't necessary to the story. It's just something they threw in.
Yeah.
Uh, Along with Tommy Chong's character, I didn't really know what he was doing in the movie besides being Tommy Chong and having kind of a funny cameo. It's it just those two elements felt really out of place. But one way we're going to disagree. I think the thing that was most out of place in this movie is Nicolas Cage's performance, because I don't know what movie he was in, but he was in a very different movie than everyone else.
That is true.
Because this movie, as we've discussed, gets quite disturbing. While meanwhile, around these events that are happening, you have Nicolas Cage going full vampire's kiss out there and doing these crazy voices. And I get it, like channeling his father and whatnot, which I don't think was a bad idea. In fact, the element that was missing in the original, where the meteor not only affects the ground around him, and this it affects everything, the electronics, things psychologically, everything. And I thought that was a great element. But Nicolas Cage going into full-blown Nicolas Cage mode really, it's it did not do it for me in this movie. And I love Nicolas Cage. There's so many movies. I mean, we did a Nicolas Cage episode last year, and it was great. He was not the right choice for this movie, and so much of this movie hinges on him. It feels really distracting. And I know a lot of people really loved his unhinged performance in this. Early on in the movie, it was, when he was a lot more grounded, it was fine. But the crazier things got, the wilder he got, I think the more it detracted from the movie as a whole. And I hate saying that, but I watched it a while back and revisiting again recently. It my opinion of this movie changed a decent bit from my last viewing, and that was the big thing that just didn't do it for me, because it's so different than the tone of the rest of this movie. I don't think we needed a super hammy performance for it. And that's, you talk about, that's been most people on the reviews I've read seem to be completely fine with it, but oh man, it took me out of the movie at times, and I really hate that. So mainly those three elements are what I had the most problem with, but the problem for me is the Nicolas Cage one really detracted from it. I would still recommend this movie, but because I think it is a faithful Lovecraft adaptation. It does hit so many of the themes, and the effects are, for the most part, pretty great. But I think it ends up being a mixed bag, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And there's another shot at the apple with this story, not directly, but with an homage to it, that I can't wait to talk about later on our live, which you should have been watching. I think I agree. Before everything happens, Nick Cage is great. That scene with him and Jolie Richardson, and she is adamant that now that she's had this cancer scare, he doesn't want her anymore, and he's desperately trying to show her, like, no, I still want you. I'm still in love with you. That scene there on the porch is so sweet. But it definitely feels like they were like, when you want to do this movie, and people go crazy, you're gonna put Nick Cage in it. Because there is that, he does the voices, and you're like, okay, that's a little weird. But we all have impressions of. There are people that I've known throughout my life that I have impressions of when I talk about them or tell stories about them. They have a voice. But it's a scene. To me, it's a scene in the car where there's an accident in the kitchen. That is, oh god, utterly horrifying. And it's just a simple thing as cutting carrots. But that scene where he just starts like screaming and punching the top of the car, I'm like, that's why we got Nicolas Cage. And then from there on, it is full bore, just like they just let him off the leash. I do agree that as much as I love him in this movie, for Lovecraft, it is a tonal like whiplash, his performance. But also, I think also to me it also is I'm here for Nicolas Cage to be Nicolas Cage. So I was all for it. I do recommend checking it out. I do wish, because this was supposed to be the first part of a new trilogy, not a Color Out of Space trilogy, but Richard Stanley was going to do 2 other adaptations. I think he was supposed to be doing I think The Thing on the Doorstep was going to be one. And then I want to say they were going to remake the Dunwich Horror. Sadly, those are long gone because of his personal life and situations. So those movies are not happening. But
I would,
dirtbag,
people.
Yeah, don't be gross. But that's gonna wrap up. Again, like I said, I recommend checking out, if nothing else, for that scene alone. You'll know the one when you get there.
And I agree. It is definitely worth checking out. As a fan of Lovecraft and Lovecraft movies, I've had to accept that most of them are going to be fairly flawed. But I think the goods outweigh the bads in this respect. But yeah, worth checking out. There's a few detractors, but nothing that would make me say do not watch the movie. And I said, especially early on, where I think Nicolas Cage, who could do more subtle things quite well. We're all so used to him being the crazy lunatic, like in Vampire's Kiss or in Face Off. You kind of forget that he could do the quiet moments quite well, and the tender moments. And I know it's tough because he's supposed to be portraying someone that gets more and more unhinged as the story goes. And I just don't think his acting style was conducive to portraying that. But I'm done rattling on about that. I still love Nicolas Cage. Still really dug this movie.
Oh no, you're good. Like when we get around to finally doing King adaptations, don't worry, I'll be in the hot seat.
Yeah. Oh, I know you have some thoughts on that.
Speaking of somebody turning it to 11, no, we'll get there. But so that's gonna wrap it up for this Halloween horror month. Next month, I'm not gonna tell you what it is because if you really want to know, you'll go back to our Twitch that we did live yesterday when you're watching this on YouTube, and we announced it there. So go check it out, and then I will see you guys next week. Until then, stay spooky. I don't know. I'm terrible. We gotta come up with an ending to these videos, dude. I suck.
We really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're happy Halloween. Hocus Pocus sucks.
Bye.